Why should you have a relationship with God when you can't even see him? Welcome to the Design Your Legacy podcast. My name is Angelina Carleton, and this morning I have the pleasure of introducing Joe Rockey. 2017, Mr. Rockey felt that something was missing in this world, and he reached out to the most media-friendly priest that he knew, Father Boniface Hicks. Since that time, they've recorded about 254 podcast sessions on their own with the goal of bringing people into relationship with God in pragmatic ways. Their podcast is called Father and Joe. And in his regular life, for economic purposes, Mr. Rockey runs a number of real estate businesses in the Pittsburgh area. Welcome, Joe.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is going to be an exciting conversation. I think that we need to have some more spiritual conversations, regardless of the walk that someone may be walking in this world today, because it can't just be all about money and politics.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that when you have a relationship in your life that centers you, that makes you realize that you're not the most important person on the planet, it's very beneficial for everyone. And that's part of what we're trying to accomplish in the podcast, is to show that, we recognize that not everyone is necessarily our religion who's listening to the cast. We're actually popular around the world in that regards. So I know that we're in a number of countries that are not Christian or Catholic dominated, however you'd like to say that. But obviously my co-host and the one who's giving the majority of the spiritual advice is a Catholic priest. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is just show the importance of having God in your life.
Yes.
And with God, there's a lot of practical elements that people just don't have. And as you mentioned, I'm a real estate person, so I have fixed houses in basically any capacity you have. So
You've got tenants and you flip, and you've done wholesaling, and you've done financial planning, and you also have a newborn son, and
yeah, all of that. So I'm very practically driven. At the end of the day, when you're on a site, and you need to fix the plumbing for something, you have to do this, that, and the other. So if you do this, it will work, and it'll work. But in the realm of God, people don't see, if I do this, what is it will work, what is the benefit of it? And that's really what we try to accomplish, is there are pragmatic benefits that you get from essentially becoming closer to God, and with the end goal being that, you're going to feel it, but every other relationship in your life is better. And it's all about relationships, which for me as the host of the show can make things a little difficult, because I come from a very blueprint kind of world. Put up your studs, put up the roof, like this is what we're doing the way it is. Relationships don't work that way, right? So at the end of the day, Father constantly is teaching me that this is a relationship, and we as humans know that we need to be relational. That's a natural law of life. So like I said, that's kind of where we start with, and then every episode dives into a particular element of it. So in our couple of recent ones that we did, I live in the same world as everyone else, and I was told that I was not essential, which was a very big thing for me for about a year and a half, that my business didn't matter. That's what my governor told me. So needless to say, I was very stoked about that, especially as more and more evidence came out that the way that the government handled it was not beneficial at best. So
let me interrupt you for a moment.
Yeah.
So, so you felt that there was something missing in 2017. Is that what inspired you to start Father and Joe?
Yeah. So, So at the end of the day, it's kind of the stuff that you mentioned there in the beginning. People are throwing their lives into politics as, they're going down directions of self-centeredness, politics, essentially trying to fill a void in their life that made them really narcissistic. That's the medical term for it.
Okay.
And you can't live like that. You can't. It's very hard to be an employee when you are like that.
Yeah.
So, my business has been my various businesses have been in existence since 11. So
2011. Okay.
Yeah. So you're talking about that point, half a decade or so of hiring people and seeing the trajectory that they're going. And not just in my employees, but just general people looking around in life. There was something that was just off. There was so much malice at the time, especially when you turn on the TV. Remember in 17 was the second year of Trump. And anyone who can remember that far they say that people who talk against COVID are mean and angry. You got to multiply it by 1,000. And that's how it was on the daily take about how the orange man doesn't know anything. And that's basically what I was experiencing at the time was not any politics whatsoever, but not having a centering force in your life will pull you in any direction.
Into the extremes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're lucky, it's not extreme, but it's probably going to end up there. Yeah. So once you get there, it's not beneficial for you. Like there is no benefit of living on Twitter and just continually condemning people just because they're not on your team or whatever. And that part of your life, like people have this thought that they can compartmentalize elements of their lives. And what I do online won't bleed over into the way I deal with my wife or the way I deal with my family or however it is. When human nature and basically any psychologist will tell you that's not how it works.
How we do one thing is how we do everything, they say.
Essentially, it all bleeds. Now, obviously, when you're throwing a baseball, you're using a particular set of skills that's different than how you drive.
Right.
But the overarching element of how you do relationships will bleed over. So if you're in an area that is only trying to make yourself stand out, trying to make yourself the most significant, and that's all you're putting yourself into continually, and you only get positive satisfaction from when you're getting likes or whatever it can be, which by themselves can be very superficial, you're going to be in a spot where your life isn't fulfilling. And then we do know from psychology that once you go down a downward spiral, it only can accelerate unless you concretely change something about yourself. And that was really the direction I was seeing. I mean, I was seeing it everywhere. When you have, think about all the stuff that happened during Trump. It just kept spiraling and spiraling more. And I believe that at the core of it was this problem. And again, I think Trump was a horrible president. I'm not trying to say he wasn't, but what I'm saying is society can't work like that. When all we're trying to do is tear each other down and make ourselves stand out, it's really a problem. And like I said, that's what we're trying to combat. That's one of the very practical reasons you're going to do that for relationship patterns.
So I realize that your podcast, Father and Joe, talks about the struggles and the successes. So why does it matter to talk about both of those things today? Does it bring us closer to God, or what say you?
Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's everyone's choice, right? So, life is really anyone's choice. If I want to go run a marathon, I got to choose to go and practice and exercise for it. And we basically go off of the same model as anything else in that capacity. When you see someone who's already done this or gone through this, it can, make your life easier. Like, okay, someone else was able to do this and they came from a much harder situation than me. And it wasn't always really easy and breezy. Like people had problems along the way, and that's the way life is. So yeah, we didn't consciously, I don't think at any point try to say we wanted specifically dwell upon weakness and strengths or anything like that. It just kind of happened. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, the topics are very relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I mean, you cover everything from Fatima to Ukraine to, there's a variety of subjects. Mm-hmm. So how does God or having a spiritual direction matter as you think about your legacy as a young man?
Yeah. So, absolutely. So in terms of the legacy, the way I always viewed it was your job is to make a difference at the end of the day. That's why you're here. I mean, I've had various people tell me different elements of that. Some people say life is a test and you're going to be judged at the end. That's part of what the Christian teachings are. But at the end of the day, it's, you're here. Did you make it a better place or a worse place? Because the same is not an option. Physics can teach you that the same is not an option. So you either made something better or something worse by your actions and your words. So being close to God is going to do that, because look at really what being close to God means. It means that you're living a virtuous life. And at least in the way that it's taught in the Catholic faith, is that basically boils down to the four elements. Prudence, which means that you continually want to learn. You want to become more intelligent about the process you're talking about. Temperance, which essentially is you don't overdo anything. So as you said, you don't go to an extreme. You have an anchor there. Justice, which is justice. I mean, that boils into a lot of things. And then faith, faith and hope. So essentially that everything we're doing this for is going to have a positive effect. And like I said, you see it in the world whenever there's a natural disaster or something. Yes, the news will focus on the lady who lost everything, but almost immediately you see the fire trucks that are coming down from all over the country and people trying to help out. And that kind of thing makes a difference. And that's all part of what we're trying to articulate. So at the end of the day, if the way you say a prayer is slightly different than the way this guy says a prayer, that's not really what's relevant to me. To me is that if you start living the life and you try to learn more, being a prudence, you try to be humble. That's part of temperance. And you try to do what's right, which is part of justice. It kind of will fix itself along the way within yourself. You know what I mean? So it's that's the goal, and that's kind of really what we're trying to attack with that.
Awesome. Awesome. So how does having spiritual based conversations, how is that unique in today's conventional society?
Well, there's not a lot of us doing it. So I guess in that starting point that it's unique just from that standpoint. We live in a world where so many people are, what am I going to get out of it? And if I don't see immediate results, I don't want to do that. You can
But
look
what's
at
in
that.
it for me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And why should I worry about the long run? And, that has become more and more prevalent with every generation since World War II. And you can prove it in a lot of different ways. One way is to do it is the savings ratio that an individual has. So for people who are from the World War II era, they saved like crazy. Very little of their life was spent on credit with credit cards or anything like that. And now the average American has more in credit debt than they do in savings. And that number has just grown more and more. So you can't, so it becomes always a problem if you ever want to retire. If you owe more than you have, how are you supposed to do that? And you can argue that that's a loss of hope. Why should I project for the long run that, since every teacher I've had since fourth grade told me the world's going to blow up in 20 years, why should I try anything? Why should I care about the future? Why should I get into a relationship with someone if I can just go on the internet and get what I need right now taken care of? So that's the kind of things that we're pushing back against. And I think that having these kind of conversations really do illuminate that it is way valuable to stay with someone for the long term, to actually be communicating with a person that you can see and actually talk to and touch, rather than someone who might not even be real. I think about the first national story of someone getting catfished, which
Okay.
was Tua, who was the linebacker at Notre Dame. He was going to be a high draft pick. And there was like a culture shock. Like everyone who was older than 40 couldn't understand how you could think you have a relationship over a computer with someone you never met. Well, basically anyone who was younger, that was like, well, this is life. And, that's all in the same vein of relationships, that you got to be able to have tangible, real relationships. Not saying you can't, help someone you've never met, but if you're going to build your life around it, it's much better to be engaged with a particular group of people, which most people would call that a family.
Or congregation, a community. Yes, yes, all of
Exactly.
that,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the above. Is there a price, do you think, our soul could pay for not having these dialogues to work through the struggles, the successes? Is that real? Is that not real?
Well, yeah. I mean, the price is what we have now. At the end of the day, when you don't have humans by their nature need to be called to something that's greater. That's been known throughout history, regardless of which culture you look at. Everyone has recognized that. And in our particular culture, over the last 50 years or whatever, there has been a call to remove the old, essentially, from life, whether it be organized religion, whether it be the way that you shouldn't think the way that your parents think about the way life should be, about the way gender roles should be, or whatever. And I'm not saying that all of it's wrong, but I'm saying that when you're destroying everything that was laid out before you, there's probably a reason some of it existed for as long as it did. And, in reality, if you get rid of the calling to make yourself humble, which ultimately is a byproduct of recognizing that there's a God, you recognize there's someone who's better than you, more important than you, and way more powerful than you could ever dream of. That in itself is a humbling act. And it is, in my opinion, humbleness or humility, whichever it applies grammatically, is the most important thing that's missing from this world. And you see it so starkly when someone actually does present humility. Whereas, that's the person you want in your company. That's the person you want to hire. I know I said this in an episode probably about a month ago, but I would way rather hire someone who messed up and tried to fix it, and their fix it actually made it worse, than someone that messed up in the first place and just try to hide.
They
And
were afraid that they would look bad.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because of image or whatever. So that, I know that's a me personal thing, as the way that I hire people, but it's also kind of true for everyone around them. Do you want to be with a person who never accepts blame for everything and it's always someone else's fault, pushing out all of their issues? Or do you want to be someone who recognizes, I got some stuff, I'm not going to, come down as harshly, because I know at the end of the day that I'm not perfect either, like we all are.
I heard something recently, and the line was, all change starts with being honest.
Yes, indeed. Sorry for that. You caught me mid drink, but yeah, absolutely. And really, I mean, honestly, I mean, is the core of this relationship. If you look at the way that the majority of debate is done now, compared to just what it was, I guess going back to Obama, even, like, that's not that far ago. Obama was here 10 years ago. And the way that they could have discourse and conversation about things can't happen now. They actually talked about issues, and whether you agreed with what Obama wanted to do, he articulated an issue with what he wanted to get accomplished and why he wanted to get accomplished. But today is just, we make the other person look evil. And if he's Hitler, how could you ever agree with Hitler? That's a bad person. So let's just make everyone on the other side Hitler, and then we win. And that's obviously not honest. It's as disingenuous as you can be. And, to me, that all comes from this same vacuum that we don't have anything guiding us in our lives. So I'm going to graft onto this, because if I graft on to Team Hillary and she wins, now I get to feel like the greatest hero ever.
And
And
living
there's the exact same
vicariously.
people. Yeah, exactly. And the same thing happened with, and this isn't new, by the way. It used to be, people would do that through their kids. And we all can think of examples of crazy parents in the stands that wanted to live vicariously through their kids. But now we live in an era where people don't want to have kids because they realize that changes your lifestyle now. So now they have to find something else to do.
Yeah, I've heard more
it's
millennials.
still negative.
Yeah, I've heard more millennials are getting pets than having children.
Oh, absolutely. It's, in that regards, it's a very interesting development. As I mentioned before, you have this dual problem that people don't want to create relationships because inevitably relationships get hard and they get messy, and you can get in a situation where it's not going to be the way you wanted it.
The
And there's
ideal.
exactly. Part of it is most people have no idea what they want their ideal relationship to be in the first place. And to sit back and to think about that from a practical standpoint. But one of the things that really kill relationships is if both persons want to be always right in the center of everything, that can't last. I mean, it physically can't last. So
I think that's called my void is bigger than your void.
yeah, I guess that is that. So yeah, so why would you put effort into someone who doesn't believe you're the most important person on the planet? And I think that that's a big element of it. And really, if you look at it, that's the thing that was driving the shut it down policy. How dare you try to kill me by breathing on me and being close to me? That was the value, if you will, behind shutting it down. There was, regardless of whether the truth was there or not, how dare you attack my feelings? And that's all the elements of the downside of not having humility in your life, essentially. Or prudence, being one to learn about the reality of what's going on, or justice to what the other person deserves. So
Yeah. Great. Good. Okay. So since this is a legacy podcast, what does legacy mean personally to you?
Well, yeah, as I said, it to me, it's making a difference. At
Okay.
the end of the day, I'm not going to be here anymore. And if someone cares enough to look at, did I leave the world a better place than when I found it? I mean, to me, it's as straightforward as that.
Wonderful. Wow. Okay. I'm glad that you've thought about this. One of the things I had commented to my husband is, and I shared this with you before we started recording, how awesome it is that, there's a couple of individuals in the Pittsburgh area that are willing to work through and talk about these issues. I almost feel like I get to eavesdrop into your living room as the two of you hash out some kind of difficult subjects that are relevant today, and you're
Oh yeah.
calling things out, and but you're looking at it from multiple perspectives. It's not just one way or the highway. It's not divisiveness. It's not cancel culture. It's the willingness to explore. And then you have Father Boniface Hicks on the other side, also offering his thoughts from a spiritual perspective.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of time he tells me I'm flat out wrong. I mean,
Yes, yes.
that does happen,
And it's very honest, and you can
yeah.
handle it.
Yeah. So, I mean, anyone who can go to the feed and go through our episodes, but an example in which we did that was when we talked about Putin, and essentially, we're Catholic faith where life is the most important value. It goes God, your spouse, your kids, but the underarching behind all of that is life. And so obviously by nature, you're against things like abortion and stuff like that. So I had this question to him. I was like, at the end of the day, I'm looking at a dude who just started a war and just started killing people. That's what Putin did. No matter how you want to cut it, that's what he did. So is it wrong for Catholics or Christians in general to essentially pray for him to be gone? And
Yes, I
that's
heard
what we
that.
discussed.
A happy
like,
death through Joseph.
yeah, exactly. That's how he articulated it. But I obviously know that we're a religion of life. That's what it is. So how do we, and like I said, that's part of what that episode dove into. But how do we weigh a blatant aggressor who is taking people's life by the proposed solution of taking his life, like essentially that type of discussion? And there's lots of different answers to it. I sort of, the way Father says it is better than I ever could try to imitate it. But at the end of the day, it's something that having these types of thoughts and questions really illuminate your own mind about where are spots that I'm a little bit weaker at, spots that I need to focus on. Because if we don't ever sit down and honestly look at ourselves, you never will, because there's never going to be a time in your day, that you're
going
like,
to say,
ooh,
let me bring it on and volunteer to look at myself.
yeah, what am I bad at? I mean, that's 100% contrary to society right now. That everyone portrays themselves in the greatest light possible. That no one wants to have any flaws or blemishes. And I'm not saying that this is unique to this generation, because it's not. I mean, but it is certainly the fact that there's a camera in every single person's pocket has exponentially increased it. You're basically getting people who are going all in or all out in that regards, and trying to play the game of impressing and living up to the Joneses, is what it was called when I was growing up,
Today's the
never works.
Kardashians. Yeah.
Yeah, however
Yeah.
you want it never works. And it's just not, it's not good at the end of the day.
Well, I think what you're pointing to is it doesn't bring meaning,
Yes.
the
Yeah,
deeper meaning.
exactly. Yeah.
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 So now that you are a father yourself,
Mhm.
how has having children changed your perspective around legacy?
Well, um, it certainly did. But the
Or
thing
how
that
you
changed,
might develop your legacy?
well, it definitely, so to answer that, I think correctly, um, I think it needs to start with the adjustment for the marriage was actually a bigger one than my son. So with the
You couldn't be hitting the bars at night or
yeah, well, that's part of it, although we did do that together. The I in my head always knew that I wanted to have kids. So I kind of already have been planning for this, and by just the nature of who I am, I'm a planner. So in terms of when Joey came around, it didn't really change my plans per se. It definitely went from them being just on paper to real. Because now there's someone who's actually going to benefit from this, other than Teresa. But so that was certainly part of it. But to me, the bigger part was adjusting to the marriage, and how that affects everything. So
is
that
that
to me,
is that considering someone else, given that today it's all supposed to be like it's all about me in this society? Is that the it's like why
um, I don't necessarily think it was that. It was that, when you're dating someone and you're with them for, X amount of hours, and then you go home, anyone kind of just focus on the parts they want, the fun parts of life for
ah
that period. But when you're living with someone continuously, it's not always Saturday, it's not always Friday night. So that's life. And I
yeah.
think that there was an adjustment of going through that, of what were we both really dealing with at the same time. Now, obviously we addressed and talked about it. It wasn't like we dated for 6 years, I think, something like that. And then we were 4 years before we had Joseph. So we kind of made sure that we had ourselves taken care of first before we brought, Joey into the world. Because there'd be no point if we were in a down spot, if we didn't figure ourselves out how to make this work together, why add a inevitably stressful situation, which is what a newborn is. There's just no way around that. They need to eat a lot, and they need to be woken up to eat sometimes. So that's life too.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. All right. So why does it matter to bring faith back into people's lives, given
Well,
that
yeah,
you
I
have a
mean,
podcast?
yeah.
Yeah.
So it matters to me because I really do think that this type of thing is the only way you can make a difference, because there still is, for whatever reason, a hesitancy to be seen with, being involved in faith. Like, people think that it will have a negative response if someone else knew about that.
Like in
So
the
that is
business
one of,
world or
in life, I think that
okay.
there's this counterintuitive thing that they would get shame brought upon them for trying to better themselves. Whereas if you saw someone trying to lose 100 pounds, you'd be
You
like, oh,
cheer them
good for
on.
you, you're doing great. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So the format we're going through obviously is podcasts, and at the end of the day, no one really knows what podcast you download or listen to. No one really cares. Like, no, you're never going to have that as public domain. So it's a way for people to essentially anonymously get around that barrier of, yeah, I'm trying to get better with myself. Maybe I'm not at the spot yet where I can regularly attend mass or services, but at least I can start taking steps to realizing that will probably be helpful, and try to get into that kind of conversation.
Very cool. Very cool. And if you could um, share what your legacy vision is or would be, what words would you give it?
Well, for me, and I'm glad I've kind of already accomplished this. It's where I can live in a spot where I don't need to be afraid of, well, really anything. But that's still the fact that I'm young enough where I'm not going to die. But more so, what I mean about the way that I know I'm an incredible minority. I created a business and it was successful for longer than a decade. I know I'm an incredible minority with that,
And you're a
but that
hard
was my
worker.
goal. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it had to be. That was my goal, because now I'm at a spot in life where I can go out and say what is true, not what I believe is true, but what actually is true. And if someone has a problem with it, there's no one that can fire me. At the end of the day, I have effectively achieved what I wanted to, that I can go out and be who I want to be without having to worry about someone judging me. And that really, that's really one of the perks that come out of being stable with yourself, and really marriage helped that tremendously. I don't know how to describe that. But that's really the accomplishment of where I'm at, is that, I can have conversations with you like this. Whereas if I had a boss and I was worrying about climbing the corporate ladder, and, I'd always have that in my mind, which is
I
hard.
gotta go in 10 minutes. My lunch break is about to end.
Yeah, something. Yeah, exactly.
The boss is calling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or even just the content matter. If he doesn't like what I'm saying, he can
Oh
shoot me
yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Now I guess in the world that's more common with political type elements. How dare you support this cause or that cause or whatever? But
Although there
it
was a guy,
exists.
yeah, although there
um,
was a guy at Apple who lost his job. I don't remember the exact story, but it's because he had written a book and yeah.
Oh yeah, they happen all over the place, but those are just the ones that get publicized because they're suing people like Google and Apple, and Facebook. So like they get wind because you got a 9-figure lawsuit behind it. But just the run of the mill guy who's just trying to make it through middle management, he might never know exactly why, but at the end of the day, every employee only has a job because the owner doesn't want to do what your job is or can't. So if you're under the category of they just don't want to do what you're doing because they'd rather be doing something else, you're by default, by definition, expendable. So if you're bringing extra burden, the desire to want you just lowers.
Yeah.
And that's a fact of economics. That doesn't matter what economic system you're in at all. That is a fact of life. So I essentially removed myself from that equation by building my own business. And that's really the joy of that. And, I thoroughly encourage anyone to do it. I know it's very hard and very rare to work, but I still would encourage people to try. It's a
Yeah.
very big learning experience building your own business.
Well, I think as an entrepreneur, it's a different mindset and it's a different schedule. Like you might have to answer that email at 11 p.m. at night, and you might
Mm-hmm.
not, you might have to work that weekend for 10 years.
Yes, yes, yeah. It's certainly different when you have your own skin in the game, because it's either this is going to work or we're not going to eat. And there was a
Yeah.
large period of my life, especially in the beginning, when I knew what every single Keller letter meant. So I knew when it was a 10-day notice coming from the electric company. I knew when it was a 30-day notice from the water. And I knew all that because I had to bounce it around because I was stretching it so hard that the long term was going to be awesome, but the short term might kill me. And that was the first 3 years of the business. And obviously I made it work, but it's very hard to do. It's a different mindset. It requires much more practical, results driven lifestyle that most people don't need to have in a regular job. Most people's jobs, I show up, as long as I'm good enough that I don't get fired, I'll get allowed to come back together. Whereas when you need to create something, it needs to be perfect, or
Yeah.
no one comes back tomorrow. So
Correct. Correct.
that definitely puts a lot of extra emphasis when now you're not just supporting yourself, but you're supporting, everyone else's families.
The
So,
responsibility goes up the
mhm.
level. Yeah.
And some people will step up with you throughout that journey as you grow, and some people will work themselves out and out of the organization, and that's just the way it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a refinement process, that one.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Yes, it is.
Okay, a couple more questions.
Mhm,
Since you are, I would say you're a go-getter, an incredible
mhm.
work ethic, ambitious, et cetera, et cetera. Um, how would you, if you could give advice to a young entrepreneur out there, what advice would you give regarding them developing their legacy or their legacy plan? And I asked this question because I think I shared this in my initial conversation with you. About 80% of the listeners and viewers are under age 40.
Yeah. So the first answer would be, if you're in a situation where you can't see yourself there for 3 more years, get out of it now. So in terms of that, and the way that it applies to my world now is that if I don't see someone I can work with for a year, I can't work with them for today. So that's the first thing. Now, I know obviously when I first started out of college, I had to deal with people that I absolutely had no desire to be around, but I needed to build up a capital base so that whenever I did go to start something, I had no idea what business I was going to start. I just knew I would need money for it, which is true. I mean, there are resources that are required, but I think what a lot of people have is this problem in their head that they can't go and get said resource, and they need to have everything themselves. And that's just flat out not true. Um, so
One has to swallow their pride though to ask for help, whether it's
yes, that's true.
financial, mentors, sponsors,
And sometimes it means
coaches.
swallowing some of the bottom line. So
Yeah.
I know with myself, I have been in sales in one capacity or another since I was 15. So, your basic sales process is you need a prospect to have someone to sell to, you need to get them to agree to buy it, and then you need to end deliver on the product or service. So I knew that I just personality wise, I'm not the kind who can do prospecting well. It's just not something I do. But I can do in front of someone, get them to agree with whatever we're trying to do, whether it be get a tenant to move in or me to buy a house off of someone. And then the end product being, I either give them a check if I'm buying them the house or give them the keys, however you want to look at it. So for myself, I partner up with people who have the opposite skill set of me. And I think that's something I would recommend to everyone. Don't try to find many versions of yourself. Try to find the opposite of you. And that's true for all business relationships, but for your marriage as well. Try to find someone who's good at something
Strengths
for the opposite.
complement.
Yeah. So I have a number of entities, and part of the reason I do is because I have different partners that do different things. So they all essentially, for me, do the prospecting in one capacity or another. And the joy of my world, at least, is, and I guess this current world is, you don't need to also be next to me while we're doing this. So two of my guys live in Pittsburgh, two of them live out of state, and one of them I've never seen in person, but my calendar is always full and we're making money together.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where in the world that they are. It matters that together we're building a process to work. And yes, does that take away from my bottom line? Of course, he's a partner. He's getting a cut of the action, but it's better to have a percentage of something than 100% of nothing. And I knew that I obviously I know how important prospecting is. Like imagine if you were trying to do build a football team and you only cared about offense. You're very good at offense, but you had no defense whatsoever. Well, you're going to eventually lose every single game, even if you score 49 points, because your defense can't do anything. So you need to pair up with someone who knows that side of the world. And that's what I did. So like I said, I recognize the prospecting is important. I know it aggravates me. A lot of things I don't want to do revolve around the world of prospecting. So I found someone who does like it. He gets to do the part of the world he likes. I get to do stuff I like, and we're way more fruitful as a result, even though each of us are now taking less than 100% home.
Yeah.
So that's certainly something I would recommend there. And then the other part is when you're looking at criticism from the outside, and I think that this is a life skill, regardless of whether you're an entrepreneur or not, you have to be able to evaluate whether it's real or not. Like there are some things that are just flat out bad ideas. Like you're not going to beat gravity. Like that's life. So if you're getting someone who's actually pointing that out, like maybe you need to tweak your product this way or that way, and it's a real thing. You need to be able to be able to look at your capacity that way. But you also need to be able to realize there are people out there that just want to destroy you and get joy out of that. And you got to be able to tune that out. So that those two skills, I think, are probably the most important ones at the end of the day.
Very cool. And last question, what values get to be honored by you living and creating and completing your life's legacy?
Yeah, I mean, accomplishment's not a value, but that's the reward that you get.
Maybe you could say personal satisfaction.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the reward of it. I mean, to me, the value is knowing that I'm helping other people maybe not get exactly where they want, because obviously you have a negotiation with what you're paying everyone, and everyone wants to be paid infinity, and that's not how the economy works. But I'm definitely helping them, giving them a job now to work through. I'm helping my tenants by having a place to live, but the way that I do things a little uniquely is all of my properties are rent to owns. So these are mostly people who had a house themselves for whatever life circumstances, whether they didn't know how credit works or their divorce attorney told them to kill their credit, can't get a mortgage right now, but they have a decent job and they want to own their own house and not get micromanaged by a landlord. And there's tremendous relief that goes into there, knowing that you're not always on the edge of, am I going to get kicked out or not? And that permeates throughout your whole life. We didn't really talk about stress in this, but removing stress from your life is something that will permeate, help the rest of your life. And that is a direct, tangible benefit of creating a relationship with someone who's with God, with a higher power. Like you will learn that whatever you're stressed out about at some point boils down to being less significant, and with less significance becomes less stress. And then it just all kind of moves into a better, healthier life.
Yeah. So I might say your second value is service then.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I mean, that's part of it. Making a difference. You got to do something if you're going to make a difference.
Very cool. Anything else? And then I'll read my closing paragraph.
Like I said, I appreciate you giving us a chance to give a little more exposure to the podcast. We are Father and Joe. You can find us on any one of the platforms, in terms of in your phone, Spotify, Apple Cast, Android, all of them. So like I said, we appreciate it. And like I said, give us a chance. It's something that a lot of people benefit from.
Yeah, I've listened to 7 episodes. And my husband has listened to episodes as well. And we found it to be refreshing and relevant. And even if someone doesn't agree, it's almost like you get dropped into someone else's living room and you can hear them get very honest, because I don't know if mainstream media is going to get as honest about various perspectives and being able to question things and call things out. And so it's refreshing.
Yeah, I don't think they can at the end of the day. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about trying to climb the ladder. If you understand that they don't want to hear as a guest, you never get invited back. So if you're expecting that paycheck, it doesn't work. There was an attorney that just happened to last year, Garrett, the guy who represented Scott Anthony, or Anthony Peterson rather. He was like, they love me, and then until they hated me, and I never changed anything I said. And I was like, well, that's the problem with this current world. But anyway, that's a side note there.
Okay, well, thank you, Joe, for telling your truth and coming on here and sharing your thoughts so openly, and also as a young male in this world, being able to speak into legacy, because I just echo that phrase, positive role models, in every single one of these podcast episodes, because I think the young people under age 40 that are listening and watching this can benefit from hearing what you have to say, understanding how it is that you're navigating forward. So again, they know that their problems aren't unique to their life, and neither are, the questions that they might have, whether it's related to their soul, their spirit, their walk, etc.
Yeah, it really does. It carries over to every other element. it's the spot of health that no one talks about, but it really is. You got spiritual, physical, and mental. It's part of the triangle of your being, and most people ignore it completely. So for what it is.
Okay. All right. So in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moot around their castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content of this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Please like and subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review. And we will see you next week. Thank you so much. And thank you, Joe.
Perfect. Thank you.